Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, wherever you may be. Huge thank you for joining us this morning on our dry run of improving the customer experience through coaching. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I want to give a special thanks to Bob Davis, who is going to be leading this webinar. Please allow me to give a brief introduction of Bob. He is a premier customer contact center expert. Bob has worked extensively for nearly 40 years on sales, retention, and customer service projects in contact centers across a wide array of industries. He has the experience and ability to dramatically improve the performance of sales, retention, and customer service teams. He also has the credibility to work with supervisors, sales reps, retention reps, and CSRs, along with the senior management personnel who oversee projects. In short, Bob knows how to drive contact center results forward quickly with world-class training, coaching, and support. He has driven desired results for market-leading clients, including AT&T, DirecTV, CenturyLink, Comcast, Cox, Morgan Stanley, Princess Cruises, and Holland America, the San Francisco Chronicle, USA Today, Verizon, and the Washington Post, to just name a few. So please welcome Bob Davis as he takes us through improving the customer experience through coaching. Bob, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Adam, and hello, everybody. Thanks for attending the seminar. A few years ago, I was invited by one of the largest credit unions in the country to look for ways to improve their customer experience, or as they like to call it, member experience. And the first thing I did was, and it's usually what I do first, is to look at the way that the agents spoke with their customers. And what I found were very nice people who had pleasant voice tones, but there was this transactional quality to their calls, this drive to efficiency rather than a focus on effectiveness. For example, getting the account number was one of the issues that they had. In fact, probably most of us have a need to get the account number, but how we do it affects the customer experience. I've even seen agents build it right into their opening. They say, "Thank you for calling. What's your account number, please?" And when you take call after call, day after day, week after month, this builds some really strong habits. And the habits can either be good or bad. And I've heard, and I'm sure you have too, because of the habits that are built, the customer says something like, "I'm calling about my mother's account. She just passed away." And the agent says, "May I have your account number, please?" You know, we all know that when we go to improve the customer experience, we're dealing with ingrained habits. Now, back to my credit union story, I next wanted to see how the supervisors were impacting the customer experience. I wanted to shadow the best supervisor on the floor. In this case, her name was Jessica. In fact, they had just made her the lead supervisor. She was very knowledgeable, very efficient, and she did the work of a supervisor and a half. She was so efficient. But unfortunately, that efficiency carried over to her coaching. She was quick, to the point, and you could see in her agent's face that she just wasn't really connecting with them. I watched her as she was doing a one-on-one coaching session with an agent. They listened to a call together. And of course, there were a lot of things that the agent did well on the call. And there were a few things that didn't go quite so well. And Jessica jumped right to the bat. She says, "There's 3 things you need to change," and she rattled them off. Very efficient, but not so effective. You should have seen the look of rejection on the agent's face. I went to leadership and I asked, "So tell me, why did you make Jessica the lead supervisor?" And I was told because she was the most efficient. She got twice as much done as any other supervisor. And I could see that, it made sense to me. And indeed, I'm sure you'd all agree there's a lot to do for a supervisor to do. I did a time and motion study one time for the supervisors in one of the largest cable companies in the U.S. And I identified 44 activities that the supervisor was responsible for in any given week. And coaching their people was only one of these 44 responsibilities. So what's keeping us from delivering the kind of customer experience you'd like to deliver? One of the things for sure is this whole idea of efficiency versus effectiveness. Our agents are great, but they have habits that drive down the customer experience, and these are deep-seated habits that need to change. And as supervisors, there are all these tasks that the supervisors have to do, taking away from the time that they could be spending coaching to a better customer experience. So we keep piling on more and more on the supervisors and coaches. And the question that I would ask is, what is the purpose of a coach? And as we look at it, we see that the coach's job is to get your people engaged, to help them to create this robust connection between their work and the customer. We also think that the purpose of a coach is helping your people to do the right things that will improve customer experience. So that's the framework for today's webinar. Is we look at the purpose of the coaching is to be these two things. There's a story that I like to tell about these two young fish are swimming along and they meet an older fish, and the older fish says to the two young fish, "How's the water, boys?" And they say, "Fine," and they swim along, and a little while later, one of the younger fish says to the other, he says, "What's water?" And of course, the point is that we're so used to the way things are that we don't see what they could be. So I've got a question for you, and that is, what is your water? Is it accepting the mediocre performance of a long-term employee just because that's the way she is? Is your water, is it rushing through the coaching because you're just so busy that you don't have the time to really connect with people? Is it accepting a high turnover of agents because that's the nature of the work? You know, we all have water that is our environment, our culture, and we just get used to it. This is an important question for today, and that is, what needs to change in your organization for the customer experience to improve? And I'd like you to think about that for a minute, and I'll give you two possible answers. One is the customer experience skills of your agents need to change, and another possible answer is the coaching skills of your supervisors need to change. And we're going to walk through some coaching tactics today that will help your supervisors. The cornerstone of effective customer experience from our point of view is skill transfer. And when I talk about skill transfer, I'm talking about the ability to take a skill that you have and transfer it to somebody else. For example, the ability to tie a bow tie is a skill, or the ability for your agents to ask follow-up questions to better understand the full situation and get to the root cause of the customer issue is a skill. Let's take a look, if we can, at the 5 steps of the skill transfer process. Our people need to understand what the skill is and why it's important. So as a result, we need to explain the skill that we're going to transfer to them. We need to be able to demonstrate that skill we want our people to execute at the level we want it executed, critical that we're able to demonstrate this skill. The third step of the skill transfer process is to practice with coaching. No skill transfer is complete without this practice. And then the fourth step is we put the agent back on the phone and we observe as they talk with the customer, applying the skill that we've transferred to them. And then the fifth step, after the call, we can give them some feedback. This last weekend, my grandson had the need to wear a tie, and on Friday he asked me if he could borrow a tie from me and if I could tie it for him. And I was really busy on Friday, and I was really tempted to just go over there and tie it and loosen it up and put it over his head and tell him just to keep it loosened so that he could put it on Saturday when he needed it. But then I said to myself, that's not the right thing to do. So I spent the time to do a skill transfer and taught my 14-year-old grandson how to tie a tie. And we see this with supervisors all the time. You know, an agent calls the supervisor over, they've got a systems issue. The supervisor looks at the problem, they've seen it before, click, 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 and then the problem is fixed. The supervisor walks away to take on a new task, but the agent's skill hasn't improved. The next time the problem comes up, they won't be any better off in trying to solve it. So it's the old efficiency versus effectiveness again. So the ability of our agents to ask good questions and even better follow-up questions is a skill. Transferring these skills is part of our job as a coach, the way we see it. And unless you do this skill transfer of the skills that they're going to need in order to have a good customer experience, the odds of your people picking up these skills are really thin. Unless your people have the ability to ask good questions, to get to the heart of the matter, have the ability to ask good follow-up questions so they can understand the full situations, the odds of improving your customer experience are very low. There are lots of skills that impact customer experience. Enthusiastic greeting, the assurance of help, using the customer's name effectively. All of these skills could be improved through skill transfer. I'll give you an example of how this works. We were doing a project for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, making outbound calls to sell ad space on their website to small businesses. And when we started, 67% of the customers ended the call in less than 30 seconds. It's hard to have a great customer experience with those customers if they end the call so quickly. And the trick, of course, is to make an emotional connection within 30 seconds. And it sounds something like this. Hi, this is Bob Davis with the Post-Gazette, calling for Sam Johnson. This is Sam. Well, hello, Sam. And you have to greet Sam like he's a long-lost brother. And I worked with the agents using this 5-step skill transfer to get them to have a greeting just like the one I demonstrated. This, of course, was outside the comfort zone of a lot of the agents, and I had to explain why it made an emotional connection. I had to demonstrate what I had wanted them to do, and then, of course, we had to practice to get the agents out of their comfort zone and to use the greeting the way that I just demonstrated it. But here's the interesting thing. Once they started developing the skill, we moved the number of 30-second calls from 67% to below 30% with this simple skill transfer process. There was an interesting study conducted that I want to share with you about how skill transfer works. The study was conducted by the International Personnel Management Association, and they found that ordinary knowledge transfer training increases productivity by 22%, but training combined with skill transfer coaching increased productivity by 88%. So it's clear that if you put skill transfer into your coaching activities, the increase in productivity, the increase in customer experience effectiveness is going to increase dramatically. Let's look at some of the other coaching skills that drive customer experience, all of which should have the skill transfer in them because, as I said earlier, it's the cornerstone. One of the coaching skills is side-by-side coaching. And we feel as though this is really the best way to build agent engagement. And the reason for this is that it gives you the opportunity to do real-time coaching. It also allows you to give input that improves the customer experience with that customer that's on the line. The way that we define side-by-side coaching is that you're actually sitting with the agent, you're plugged in so you can hear both sides of the conversation, you're watching what they're doing on the screen while you're listening to both the customer and the agent and listen to what they're saying. This gives you the opportunity to coach what they're doing on the screen and to some extent what they're saying to the customers in real time. I'll give you an example. I was working with another credit union out on the West Coast, and while attending their new hire class, the topic of home equity loans came up. One of the young ladies in the class, a woman by the name of Devin, raised her hand and she asked, "What's home equity?" And I thought to myself, now there's a lot of coaching that needs to happen in order for this fine person to be able to deliver an exceptional customer experience. But isn't this true of your organization? Isn't there a vast body of knowledge and skills a new agent needs to acquire in order to provide a great customer experience? Devin's supervisor did side-by-side coaching with her after she got out of new hire training and helped her to learn real time. Every issue that came up while her supervisor was side-by-side coaching with Devin, and Devin didn't know how to handle it, instead of a bad customer experience, the supervisor was able to coach to a good customer experience. And we see this all the time. A new hire class hits the floor and the customer experience numbers go down. What a perfect time for side-by-side coaching. In the case of Devin, she got lots of side-by-side coaching her first week, taking calls, and one issue after another came up, and with the help of her supervisor / coach, she learned how to deal with each of these issues. So we believe that side-by-side coaching is one of the critical skills that helps to improve the customer experience. Let's look at another coaching skill, and that's data-driven decision-making. And we look at data-driven from multiple sources. And the goal, of course, in making data-driven decision is to get to the root cause of the issue. I'll give you an example. We had a client who wanted to improve their Net Promoter Score. We looked at the calls that had a low NPS. And this particular client had a speech analytics tool that measured customer sentiment. And we found that most of the low NPS scores had a low sentiment in the first 30 seconds of the call. So then we looked at the call process, and in the first 30 seconds, we found a very complicated account authorization process. So we thought, well, maybe if we change the process. But then we kept looking at the data, and we found that there were agents with high NPS scores that were able to have a high customer sentiment during the first 30 seconds. So And what we saw as we listened to these calls was that these particular agents had developed some best practices for going through the account authorization that didn't lower the customer sentiment. So we decided that the root cause might be what the low performing agents are, the way in which they're going through the account verification process, not the process itself. So we started doing skill transfer with the agents that were not able to go through the account authorization without lowering customer sentiment, and it made a world of difference. So here's an interesting quote for you. It's by our friend Albert Einstein, and he said, "If I were given 1 hour to save the planet, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute resolving it." Do we spend enough time getting to the root cause of our customer experience issue? The Harvard Business School doesn't seem to think so. Harvard Business School completed a study of decisions made by executives in over 100 major corporations. And in hindsight, 65% of the decisions were wrong. Do you think they spent more time defining the problem and diving to root cause? Do you think if they did, those numbers would be so bad? The ability to find a problem and get to the root cause is an important skill for any organization. So let's move over to a tool that's going to help you to build engagement, and that is one-on-one performance meetings. In our mind, a one-on-one performance meeting is a minimum of 30 minutes. It takes place at least once per month. It has an agenda that you've prepared, and the agent does 80% of the talking during this meeting. This is an important part. We want to be Socratic in these one-on-one meetings, and when we make the time to hold them, it makes a world of difference. I'll give you an example. The first coach I ever had, first supervisor on my first job, was a fellow by the name of Bob Wilson, and he was just an expert at getting me engaged in the job. My job, I was paying my way through college by calling on small businesses, and then at the end of the day, I'd have these one-on-one meetings with my boss, and he was really good. He would say, "Tell me about your day. Who did you call on? What did you say? What did the customer say? What did you say in response?" And he would quiz me on this. And then after he heard what I had to say, he was just really good with the compliments. He'd say to me things like, "Wow, you're so clever. That was great." And he did such a great job of complimenting me and giving me a fine reputation to live up to that it caused me to be really fully engaged in the job. I wanted to have great successes to talk to him about in the evening after my cold calling was done. And as you can imagine, cold calling on small businesses can be intimidated. A lot of people who do it look for ways to avoid it, make as few calls as possible. But because of the engagement that Bob Wilson built in me, I made as many calls as I could each day. And over time, I just became fearless when it came to making cold calls. And that ability and that attitude are more a tribute to my coach and what he did to support me than anything else. We believe that this 30 minutes of uninterrupted time with your people, if done effectively, really builds employee engagement. We think that employee engagement is a critical part to the customer experience. When all of the coaching tactics are used by a client company, it really produces some effective results. And I want to share a case study with you. One of our clients They originally started with Interactive Intelligence and then became a Genesys client, is ResMed. And ResMed is really a top-notch company. They're a medical device manufacturer, and they've just grown and grown to the point now they're over $2 billion a year in revenue. Because of this growth, they've had some growing pains, particularly in the area of customer service. So when we went in, we took a look at the call flow. We looked at their coaching tactics, what they were doing or not doing when it came to side-by-sides and one-on-ones and huddles. And we helped them to, we looked at their existing schedule, and we helped the coaches who were just way too busy to put coaching as a priority. We helped them to put together a coaching schedule, but and equally important, we also worked on their coaching effectiveness. It's amazing how rusty our skills can get when they're not put to use regularly. And we started working with the coaches and having them work with the coaching schedule. And it's amazing the results that have come out of ResMed. Number one, their people are much happier. There's so much less griping, so many less complaints because of the way in which they're engaged from their supervisors. The agents are clearly more engaged in their customer. And here's the proof is in the numbers. Their net promoter score has gone at well over 80. Sometimes it comes in as high as 88. And the industry standard for is about 70. So they just are a leader. And it all comes from, and if you would ask them, it all comes from these coaching skills that we help them to establish and help them to use. So at this point, I want to take a little bit of a commercial break. We've talked about some of the things that we can do to improve customer experience in your organization. Now it's time for a quick commercial break from your friends at Genesys University. We have a brand new offering, and we're offering 8 coaching programs that you can bring in-house to your organization. And I want to take just a quick commercial break and show them to you, and then I'm going to open up for questions. You can start as you're thinking about some of the questions that you want to ask. If you want to chat the questions, Adam will queue those up. But let me tell you about some of the classes that we're going to be offering. We're going to offer a class on identifying the root cause through data-driven decision-making. We've got another class on making behavior stick through skill transfer, the monthly performance review, and side-by-side coaching and development. And the nice thing about all of these classes is that each one is 2 days in length, but the amount of time that we spend in the classroom is probably only 30% of the time. We'll spend a couple hours the first day on covering the material, and then we go right out on the floor with the supervisors, and we model the behavior. We coach to and mentor them as they go through the behaviors, helping them to really get these skills down. Module number 5 is coaching mastery, and this might be the best of all of them because it's on-site support and mentoring. Beyond the 2 days, we'll stay and work with your team for another up to 20 days, helping your folks to become really master all of these skills, become master. In addition to this, we have another series around floor management strategy. One is the week in the life of a supervisor, which we call a WILO. We'll help you to set up a floor management strategy, how the supervisors spend their time. We've got a module on how to run an effective team huddle. It's amazing to me that so much time is devoted to huddles, and so often the huddles aren't nearly as effective as they could be or they should be to devote that amount of time. And then the eighth module is management by walking around. How do you do a quick clap that reinforces the behaviors that are really going to drive customer experience? So that's the commercial that I wanted to share with you. These things are available to you. I'm going to open the webinar up for questions and answers. We can either do it through chat or we can open up the line, but we've got time for some questions. We got a few minutes, so love to open it up and hear what people are thinking and answer any questions that people have. So Adam, you want to take charge of the questioning?
Yeah, absolutely. Bob, I just wanted to start off with a question of my own. I love the ResMed case study, and I think that the proof of this program really shows in that NPS score. I'm just wondering if you could educate on just a ballpark number on how many companies this program has been done for.
Oh, hundreds. We have worked with hundreds of companies, and some companies are more sophisticated in measuring Net Promoter Score than others. Some of them measure CSAT, customer satisfaction, through surveys. So the more sophisticated companies that we've worked with, not only do they measure their customer satisfaction or the Net Promoter Scores, in nearly every case, those scores have gone up significantly. And some of our more sophisticated clients actually are able to tie an ROI to customer satisfaction and Net Promoter Score. For every point, they're able to put a dollar figure that goes to their bottom line. So when you start improving those Net Promoter Scores, the literally tens of millions of dollars that flow to the bottom line are there, whether you can measure it or not. Certainly the companies that can measure it are able to point very accurately to what that means to their company.
Thank you.
Just one thing here, Bob, just to add on to the question from Adam, how soon, in terms of the timeline, do we start seeing results from the training, basically?
Well, it usually takes, in order to get the skill perfected, it takes 30 to 45 days for the skill to get. Anytime you learn a new skill, there's even a little dip in performance compared to the old way that you were doing it. So in order for you to start seeing results, it starts improving in about 45 days on average. 60 to 90 days, you're building in a real sustainability. This isn't overnight, but at the same token, 45 to 90 days in the general scheme of things isn't that long either.
Thank you.
So Bob, one just came through on the chat. Says, speaking of CSAT, any insights to ASAT, agent satisfaction improvements, as it relates to receiving good coaching?
That's a great question, and it fits in two ways. One, as it relates to CSAT, we all, as human beings, we all like doing things that we're good at. So when they get good customer satisfaction scores, it validates the effort that they put in. And a job of a call center agent is hard work. It's demanding work. They leave at the end of the day very tired, mentally tired, and knowing that they're getting these high customer satisfaction scores, ever increasingly high customer satisfaction scores, really helps them to build their engagement. But the other thing, and I wanted to point that out with my example of Bob Wilson. Bob Wilson, I was his employee for 3 years, but we were friends for life because of the level of engagement that he got, because of the level of coaching that I got from him. And I think that, in my mind, that's the ideal coach-employee relationship, that we just, and there's so many benefits when we have that kind of relationship. So, for example, one of the problems, huge problems in the call center industry, is turnover of agents. And if you have the right level of engagement with your folks, they don't quit the job; they quit their supervisor generally, and the turnover reduces dramatically as we build engagement within our folks. And so it makes the job more meaningful to them because they've got a supervisor that they like and they trust, is doing all the right things to build engagement with them.
Hey, Bob.
Hey, another question's come through on the chat. What type of agent profile information have you gained from this program to help with recruiting efforts? And what kind of attrition impacts have you measured?
Both very good questions. In terms of attrition, we've worked with clients, believe it or not, and I'm stunned by these numbers. They don't even sound believable. We've worked with clients that had a 300% agent turnover rate in a year's time, and in a case like that, we've been able to reduce the turnover twofold. So that we reduced it from 300% to 100%. But again, you think, wow, 100% turnover. So obviously the numbers aren't as dramatic where the situation isn't dramatic, but it's not unusual in average situations to have a 60% employee turnover rate, and we can cut that in half on a regular basis with these types of programs when effectively done. And that was the agent attrition was half of the question. What was the other half of the question?
Recruiting efforts.
Oh, so the profile of the agents. There's a school of thought that says if I hire the right people, I won't need to spend as much time and energy training and coaching them. I don't know if I believe that philosophy. Now, clearly, you have to hire the right people. You have to hire people who have the right attitudes about customer experience, who get their feeling of satisfaction by providing good customer experience. They have to have the right kind of verbal skills. They have to have the right kind of keyboard skills so that they can talk to a customer and enter information into the keyboard at the same time. All of these things need to be, in my opinion, tested for during the hiring process, because it's just so hard to hire people and who are so lacking in some of those basic skills. But when you think about it, in most cases, there's a lot of specialized knowledge. You take a credit union that's hiring 22-year-olds to man their teller lines or to man their phone banks, and these folks, in the case of Devin, didn't even know what a home equity was, let alone what a home equity loan was. So there's a vast body of knowledge that we've got to be prepared to teach our people when we hire them, and another vast body of skills that we need to be able to transfer. And I see it as the supervisor's job. Some of those skills can get transferred in new hire training, but you can't transfer all of them. It's an ongoing process to transfer these skills for the agents, regardless of how good you are at selecting the right agents. But clearly, that's an important part of the job.
Another question: how much side-by-side coaching do agents need? And did you say that it can be accomplished during live calls?
Yeah, so ideally, side-by-side coaching is done during live calls. And most of the people on the phone are not going to like my answer to this, but my opinion is that a minimum of 50% of a supervisor's time should be spent side-by-side coaching. And trust me, I get pushback on that all the time. Supervisors, for whatever reason, would just about like to do just about anything rather than doing side-by-side coaching. They'd rather review recorded calls. They would rather do remote monitoring. And all of those tactics have their place. But the most powerful training tool, particularly with people that are fairly new out of new hire class, is side-by-side coaching. If you're on a team and you always have 1 or 2 or 3 new employees, you ought to be spending a lot of time out working with those new employees. There's no way you're going to drive customer experience if calls are being handled by new employees who just don't have the knowledge or the skill necessary to provide a wonderful customer experience. So you've got to be out on the floor working with them to do that if you're a supervisor. The long answer to a short question, but the short answer is at least 50% of your time should be spent side by side with coaching.
Bob, I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right. This is Benito. Here, question. Sometimes when it comes to the side-by-side coachings, what we notice is based on the different types of attitudes that comes across from, especially from the new hires that we kind of get, it kind of makes it difficult to do the coachings, especially the side-by-side ones. Do you think that with these new coaching techniques, these new experiences that we can probably share, do you think that might help change, or the more time that we spend with the agents will help change their attitude to more be more accepting of the coachings?
So, Benito, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. It's an area that I didn't touch on, but it's very important. So thanks for asking the question. Coaching needs to be part of the culture of an organization, and it's just, it needs to be part of your water, if you will, that everybody gets coached. It's not just the low performers. Everybody gets time with their supervisor. The coaching is done in such a skillful way that people leave every coaching session feeling better about themselves. In the example that I gave with Jessica, the agent left the coaching session feeling worse about themselves. Many times, if we're just pointing out the things that the agent does wrong, they're going to feel bad about themselves. In an ideal coaching session, you're pointing out and reinforcing 10 things that they did right for every one thing that you're correcting. And the one thing that you're correcting is done so gently. It's done ideally in what I call the Socratic method, where you're drawing out from the person. You're saying to the person, what's the one thing you could have done differently, and letting them come up with it. So when the coaching is done skillfully, agents are not resentful of it. They look forward to it because it builds them up. They feel better about themselves after having had a coaching session with you. So great question, Benito, and it's easier said than done. I'll give you that. It's easy to say that a person should feel better about themselves, but having the skills necessary and honing those skills so that every coaching interaction the agent feels better about themselves is a challenge. Trust me, I've had coaching situations where the agent ended up in tears, and I felt so badly about it, but we can't, the whole situation is an inexact science, but that's the goal anyway. Let me pause there and open it up for any other questions.
Yes. Hey, Bob and team. I have a question. This is Marja. So listening to your explanation for that question from Benito, I almost feel like it would be easier to use these processes on a new hire because they don't have, bad habits. But even when you highlighted efficiency versus effectiveness, you spoke about deep-seated habits of agents. So my question is more around getting the same thought process or the same insight, but when you're coaching a more tenured agent, because our more tenured agents, they have their deep-seated habits. They also have this mindset about what coaching truly is, and it's more difficult to get them to, understand your new process or to even relate to it. So is there anything you do differently with a tenured agent versus a newer agent?
That's a very good point, Maja, that they have habits that are within their comfort zone. So as a result, they really cling to those habits. So in the 5 steps of the skill transfer, the first step is to explain. And with tenured agents, the explanation step has to be a lot more detailed, and we have to get their buy-in. We have to explain to the tenured agent why it's critical that they change their habits. So going back to the example that I gave of asking for the account number in a very robotic way. As far as the agent's concerned, they've done that 10,000 times over the last 2 years. And as a result, it's ingrained habit. So now you're saying, I don't want you to ask for the account number in a robotic way. I want you to do it differently. Here's how I want you to do it. So then to explain why, and to really get them, you really have to sell the agent on the fact that this different way of asking for the account number is in their best interest, it's in the customer's best interest, and that's a sales job, but you can't go any further in skill transfer until they've bought your explanation. Step 1 is to explain, and they need to buy into your explanation, which is easier said than done, but great question, Marja, that as opposed to a new hire, they'll believe whatever you say. But a tenured agent, you've got to really sell them on, and you've got to have some solid logic, you've got to have some solid data to back up what you're saying. Let me pause there.
So thank you, Bob. I have a follow-up on that. I just want to understand if you think it would make sense in an organization if you have a major issue with some KPI in an organization, but you have a lot of tenured agents. Do you think it would make sense to, not necessarily start a training with the team, but maybe start to put things out there that, hey, we've been doing this wrong, so we're going to start doing it right, or something to just put that buzz out there so it's easier for them to accept it? Or do you think this is something that should be handled more on a one-on-one basis?
So if it's a universal problem, you can certainly come up with a universal solution, and it's far more efficient to get the message out if it's a universal problem. So that would be the answer. I think it's a smart plan. If you've got a lot of agents have developed the same bad habit, then you need to put out a communications that saying as a team, we're going to all pull together and we're going to help one another overcome this habit because there's a more effective way of doing this. And you just sell them on the new effective way of doing something. But if it's a common habit, a lot of times, like the 2 fish swimming along, they're in water and they don't even know they're in water. And this happens all the time with agents. They don't even you could say, we've got a big problem, and here's what the big problem is. And you've got agents who don't even realize they're contributing to that problem. So it's a challenge with these deep-seated habits. You said to some people who were just absolutely robotic with their account authentication that they were being robotic. They would be highly insulted. They just don't see it because that's their water. They're doing it every day that same way. So it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that as supervisors we need to recognize and we need to grab by the horns and do something with. Any other questions? We got time for one more, 2 more before we wrap up. Well, from my standpoint, I'm going to turn it back to you, Adam, but from my standpoint, I've been delighted to be here this morning. I appreciate all of the thoughtful questions, and I hope to see you all. Benito, Marja, it was great to hear your voices. I hope to see you again real soon. So Adam, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, great. Bob, one more question snuck in with a little smiley face. Who has been your favorite client to work with so far in this process?
Well, all of my clients are lovely. I love Clear Harbor, and I love DGS for sure. So, love them all. And ResMed is a fabulous company to work with.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone that participated this morning, and a big thank you to Bob Davis for leading this. If anybody on the call has any more questions or would like to know more about these wonderful courses that are now live, simply send an email to education@genesis.com, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So with that, I will go ahead and close. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.